All right, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the book of Revelation this morning, and it's our last book in our survey of the Bible, as we've gone from Genesis to Revelation very quickly. So, and before we get into the lesson, I did want to mention, a couple of people have asked, sometimes I give like where we are as far as how much our offerings have been. I haven't really kept track of this month because it's all going toward our Christmas offering. But in October and November, those shortened months, we collected $628. And I just mentioned that because we had said it was going to go to Pastor Smith. And I sent that money to him a couple days ago. So just an update on that before we get too far past and even forget that we had done it. And we do forget. The Christmas banquet, brother, I forgot his name even, Kyle Allen, telling about how we collected gifts and stuff, and I was like, we did that? And then I kept thinking about it, and then I kind of vaguely do remember that. So anyway, I guess it happens. As time goes by, we forget. Anyway, the book of Revelation. The writer of Revelation is the Apostle John. If you're looking in your Bible, it says the Revelation of St. John the Divine. Most likely, I've looked in a couple, I don't know I don't think the titles of these books are inspired, but there's some consistency between publishers on that. So the Revelation of St. John the Divine, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But the place that John wrote this is most likely the Isle of Patmos. He says he was there. I believe that he says he was there, yes, in verse 8, 9. So he's on the Isle of Patmos off the western coast of Asia Minor, or off the coast of Turkey. He was banished there for the Word of God and for the testimony of Christ. The date that it was written is uncertain. We, of course, believe it was the last book of the Bible written, so we put it somewhere around 95 or 96 A.D. It's interesting that the title says the Revelation of St. John the Divine, but the very first words in the book say the revelation of Jesus Christ. So it is, when we think about Revelation, one thing to remember as you read through it, and there's a lot of, some people are uncertain, some people are ambivalent, some people think, well, it's just the future. Some people are very interested into it, in the book of Revelation. One thing to help guide you, wherever you are in that, is to remember that it's a revelation of Jesus Christ. As you go through Revelation, a nice study to do, which I've done once or twice, is to just look for Christ. Don't look for horsemen, seals, vials, pictures. You're going to see all that stuff, but look for Christ. As you look for Christ through it, that's what it is. It's the testimony of Jesus Christ. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. So it's declared to be the revelation of Jesus Christ. It came from Christ. So it's the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he signified it by his angel unto John. So the revelation might be better. The title might be the revelation to St. John the Divine, the revelation of Jesus Christ to John. And I wouldn't call him a saint. I'm just reading the scriptures there. The title there, not the scriptures. Anyway, there have been basically three ways to interpret Revelation. There's a lot of different ways, but basically fall into three general ways of interpreting. There's one called the preterist, I think that's how you say it, but these people believe that everything in Revelation has already been fulfilled. So they look at Revelation and they feel like it's all taken place. It was all finished basically by the end of the Roman Empire. And so it's all been fulfilled, and Revelation is good for us just like any other prophecy in the Bible that's already been fulfilled. That's going to have an effect on your actions, okay? But that is the way some people read it. I think in particular Catholic theologians interpret Revelation this way. Then there are futurists, and this would be that the book contains a forecast of universal history, and I would say we would fall into that class. But there's a danger there in that we're just thinking that it's only useful for us to be able to predict what's going to happen. It's only useful in that we look for things that are supposed to be in the future and look for developments in the present. That's, the UPC symbol is the beginnings of the mark of the beast, and this and that, and the great eagle is America. So if you're a futurist, I think that's the right way to look at it, but there's a danger there also that you get so involved in trying to foretell and know what's going to happen in the future. Then there are people that we might call eclectics, and they lay stress on small segments of it, that the spiritual elements, we might say, there's evil, there's wickedness, and there's good at war with one another throughout Revelation. And they don't claim that Revelation tells us anything chronologically. And I would say that I think they're missing the case, missing the boat, but I think it is good to remember that the Revelation was not just written so that we could tell what's happening in the future. It was written to people. It was written to churches. It was written to 7 churches, and to us, it's been preserved for us so that we could learn from it and live from it, not just forecast from it. So I would put us as futurists, but we should keep our feet on the ground and read it looking for something that will challenge and help us. You might have heard it called the apocalypse, and that's because the word revelation in the original language is apocalypse. It just means revelation. But you've heard that word, so apocalypse is a revelation. And so it's both a revelation and a prophecy. We see that in verse 1 and verse 3. This book of the Bible contains a blessing, a special promise to obedient readers in verse 3, and at the end pronounces a curse on those who would tamper with it, those that would add to it or take away from it. And that's in chapter 22, 18 and 19. Throughout the book, we see lots of sevens. In the Bible, 7 seems to be the number of completion. If we look at all the different sevens, the 7th day of creation, lots of sevens. So we think of it being a day of a number of completion. So 7 candlesticks, 7 churches. So the 7 would tell us, if we're thinking in number-wise, that it's not just written to those 7 churches, it's written to all the churches that would, completely, all churches totally. So candlesticks, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 thunders, 7 vials, 7 spirits, 7 stars, 7 no more, 7 personages. There's lots of 7s in the book of Revelation. The closing chapters of Revelation show us a contrast to the opening chapters of Genesis. Genesis speaks of the creation of the Son, the entrance of sin into the world, the curse pronounced, Satan's triumph, the exclusion from the tree of life, and Revelation tells of a place where there'll be no need of sin. Sin is banished. There's no more curse. Satan is overthrown, and admission to the tree of life. So something that we should probably, as we read Revelation, beside being fascinated by the creatures that are in there and all of that, is to think about the moral and spiritual conflict that's going on there. It is the culmination of what is going on the earth since the beginning. Satan came in the garden, and he tempted and gained the victory over God's prime creation, and evil has been ruling. The god of this world has been having his way through time, and in the end, he will not have his way, and all those that follow him will be punished and judged for that. And that's what we see. That's one of the things we see And one of the things we should gain from that is to take that into our present day. There's wickedness around us, and there's godliness around us. And however it works out, we can gain comfort and courage from the fact that we know that God is in control, and He will ultimately and finally judge and be victor. The central figure, as I mentioned, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. The central figure of the book is the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And at last He is victor over all the powers of evil. The Lamb particularly is mentioned about 30 times. So, and then if you're reading through Revelation, to me it has a fairly simple outline. Some people see a lot of other things. There's some people that say every time John said, "I saw," is another vision or something like that, and it may be. But Jesus told John in verse 19 of the first chapter, "Write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter." And so right there is a nice outline of what John wrote. The things which he had seen, which is chapter 1. The things which are chapter 2 and 3, and I think a little bit of 4 and 5, and I'll explain that when we get there. And then the things which shall be hereafter, which are a little bit of 4 and 5, and the rest of the book. So what he had seen was, well, in the beginning there's the salutation in verses 1 through 3, and then he sees Jesus Christ in his glorified state, his majestic state. He knows it's Christ because he's seen him before, but he's not seen him like this before. He saw him as a man, became flesh, and now he sees him as God, the ruler of the world, the judge of the world, and Jesus commands to him to write to the 7 churches. And then it's got messages to the 7 churches. We've heard many messages from these messages. There's the church. This is chapters 2 and 3. The church at Ephesus was a backslidden church. They were persistent in service, strong in discipline, but they'd left their first love. Their love was growing cold. Then there's the church at Smyrna, which was a poor but truly rich church facing some persecution. Then there was the church at Pergamos, which was a church with evil surroundings, but they were steadfast in evil surroundings, but they had been infected with heresy. Then there's the church at Thyatira, which is a church of good works, many good works, second works more than the first works, but harboring the false prophetess, Jezebel. Thou hast there Jezebel. And then the church at Sardis was a dying church. Thou hast, what does he say? Thou hast a name that thou livest and art dead. And then the church at Philadelphia, it was a weak church, but they were faithful. Weak, not spiritually, but they didn't have many resources. There wasn't very many of them, but they were faithful. And then the church at Laodicea, which was a lukewarm, self-satisfied church, boasting in her wealth, while poor and miserable and blind. Now there's recurring things through this. One is promises to overcomer. He that overcometh is throughout this to each of the churches. There's also he that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And I would say here is, this is said, I think, all 7 times. It might be 6 out of the 7 times. But what God is saying is that this message to Sardis isn't just to Sardis or to he that has an ear. You have an ear. Listen to what the Spirit said to this church and to this church and this church. So these messages are for all of us. And in that sense, we could say that all the messages to each and every one of the churches can be applied to any particular or all of them could be applied to this church or to any other church throughout time. And the reason I say that is there's some people that have fancied that they see the progression of history in the 7 churches of Revelation. And, it's interesting, but if it's true that every church throughout all age could have any of these things applied to them, then it's just a matter of picking the ones in chronological order to make your scheme work. Anyway, So John writes the message that Jesus had to the churches. Then, in chapter 4, it says, "After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was, as it were, of a trumpet talking with me, which said, 'Come up hither.'" A lot of people would see this as a symbol, and let me talk about that. Revelation does have symbols in it. Chapter 1, verse 3, I believe, it says, "The testimony of Jesus Christ," verse 2. "To show unto his servant things which must shortly come to pass, and sent and signified it," or put it in signs, "by his angel unto his servant John." So there are symbols and signs in Revelation. What we don't believe about Revelation is, or what we believe along with that, is that if he says he saw a candlestick, he saw a candlestick. You know, that the word means what the word means. It's the sign, the symbol might mean something else, which he tells us. The candlestick is it the church or the angels? I can't remember. But either way, some of the signs are told to us what they symbolize. So there are signs in Revelation, and so that's where we have, you know, how broad are the signs, and how far can we go with this that is unclear? We don't know exactly what it means, so can we just run wild with it? And that's where there's so much variation in what people think Revelation means. So anyway, some people would say that this "come up hither" is symbolizing the time when those that are on the earth, when we that are on the earth and remain, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds. Come up hither is kind of a similar idea. So it may be that, it may not be. But anyway, what we do have is from there on, the scene shifts up to heaven, and John sees things there that are taking place or will take place. And that's where our chapter 4 and 5 are somewhat what's going on right now in heaven. It's not just waiting, because chapter 4 shows us the throne room of God himself. And we see the throne and the spirits before the throne and the elders around the throne. And this is, they're crying, "Holy, holy, holy." All of this is, I believe, happening now and has happened. It's God's throne room, and people are worshiping him and praising him. And that happens in chapter 4. And then in chapter 5, we begin to see some things that tend toward the future, it seems. In the right hand of him that sat on the throne was a book written on the front side and the back side, which would be a scroll written on the front side and the back side. And it was sealed. Was sealed with like stickers to put a modern sense to it. 7 stickers across it so that it doesn't fly open, or 7 seals. And who's worthy to open the book? And so there's this thing about the book, but what they find is that the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, is able to open the book. And when John hears that he's the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but when he looks and sees, he sees it's the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And so then there's the worship of the Lamb, and that's, of course, Jesus Christ. So in chapters 4 and 5, we have the worship of the Father, worship of God, and the worship of Jesus. Then what we have through the middle, then, or for the next several chapters, is 7 seals opened, which are at each opening, there is generally a judgment on the earth. And then out of the 7 seals, then the 7th seal presents to us 7 trumpets, and when each trumpet is sounded, there are judgments that go with the trumpets. And then after that, we see some other things, and then there are 7 vials. And a vial, we think of like a chemist vial. So many people call them bowls. They're just containers, things that contain, and these vials are filled with blood in the Revelation. So 7 vial judgments. And so we'll go through those quickly. First of all, 7 seals. He opens the first seal, and there's a white horse who's a conqueror. He conquers and rules. It's given, and it's given, I won't say this every time because we won't have time, but power is given unto him. When power is given unto this person, and when power is given to anybody to do something, almost every time power is given to him, who's that power coming from? God. It's coming, and it's a revelation of whom? Of Jesus. Jesus is in control. Jesus is allowing. He's saying, okay, you have power to do this. He uses evil, he uses the wicked to accomplish his own purposes. We know that. So throughout, Jesus is completely in control. But the white horse is a conqueror, and the red horse comes and peace is taken from the earth. A black horse comes, and there's famine for all except the rich. He says, touch not the wine and the oil. Well, only rich have wine and oil. So the people that eat bread and barley and all that, they have to pay a day's wage for a loaf of bread. But the rich, they're sitting at ease. And then the pale horse comes, and death comes to 1/4 of the inhabitants of the earth. So if we're at 8 billion, that means 2 billion people die. 1/4 of the inhabitants of the earth. Then the fifth seal, and we see the martyred remnant under the throne. So there's people who have died during this time because they believed on God, and they're under the throne. And then in the sixth seal, there's a great earthquake. There's massive earthly destruction, and this is where we read the phrase about the people crying to the mountains to fall on them. Fall on us and save us from the one in heaven. Then there's a parenthesis. And so we have this, and then by parenthesis, it kind of goes off and tells us about, in chapter 7, how God marks his chosen. When you think of marks in Revelation, we almost always think of the mark of the beast, but the mark of the beast is a copycat. God marked his own well before the beast said he wanted his people marked. But anyway, so God marks his chosen ones, and we see again that many are saved during the tribulation. This is a surprise to people a lot of time. It is true that if you reject Christ before he comes, you won't have a chance. You'll believe strong delusion, Thessalonians tells us, and you won't have a chance to repent and turn to him because you've already had your chance. But many people through this time will come to know about Christ, and they will believe on him. And so many will be saved then. Then we come into the 7 trumpets in chapter 8 and 9. The 7th seal is at the beginning of chapter 8, and then there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour. And there's been many humorous anecdotes made about that, but we'll move along. So then 7 trumpets, 7 angels that have 7 trumpets are revealed, and the first trumpet sounds, and there's hail and fire and blood, and 1/3 of the trees are burnt. The second trumpet sounds, and there's a burning mountain, and 1/3 of the seas turn to blood. The third trumpet sounds, and wormwood falls out of heaven to the earth, and 1/3 of the waters become bitter, and men die from the water. Then the trumpet sounds, and the sun is smitten, and 1/3 of the daytime is dark, and 1/3 of the nighttime is dark too. And I don't understand that exactly, except that the moon is kept from giving its own light. So 1/3 of the day and night is turned to darkness. The next trumpet sounds, and the bottom of this pit is opened, and locusts, are things like unto locusts, are allowed out of this bottomless pit, and they are given power to torment men, but not kill them for 5 months. And then the next trumpet sounds, and 4 angels are loosed, and 1/3 of the earth is killed. So if there's 8 billion when this starts, and 1/4 was killed, now 1/3 of 6 billion is, so we're at half the population of the earth. By the end of the 6th trumpet, the earth has half as much at most, because there's people dying from other things that have been happening along here too, when the sea is turned to blood and whatever. Excuse me. Then in chapter 10 and 11, we see a mighty angel and a book, and John is told to go and take the book, and the angel tells him to eat the book, which of course is signs, but when he eats the book, it's pleasant to the taste, but in his belly it turns to gravel, or it's very bitter. And the thinking is that it is the is the words of judgment. And so it's sweet to see evil and wickedness judged, but when you finally take it in, you realize that these people are doomed forever. And there's no rescue for them. And then in chapter 11, there are two witnesses who prophesy, and they, some people think they are Moses and Elijah come back because of some of the things that they do, but they perform many miracles and wonders, and they're witnessing of God, and they prophesy, and then they are killed. The seventh trumpet sounds at the end of chapter 11, and great praise is given to God for his judgment of the nations, which is happening and going to continue, and the temple of God in heaven is opened. And then there is another parenthesis, we might say, chapters 12 through 14. In chapters 12 and 13, we see the woman clothed with the sun. Many people believe that represents Israel. There's a great red dragon, which is Satan. There's the child, which is Christ. There's the archangel. There's war between the woman and the dragon. There's a remnant saved of the woman's seed. There's the beast out of the sea. This becomes the Antichrist. And then there's a beast out of the earth, which becomes the false prophet. The false prophet is the Antichrist's prophet. And they continue their things going along. Then in chapter 14, we see the Lamb again, with 144,000. And then there are some angels. There's an angel with the everlasting gospel. So this angel with the everlasting gospel goes throughout the whole earth. So the angel himself brings the gospel, the everlasting gospel, to the whole earth. There's an angel that's going to announces Babylon's fall and announces the doom of those who worship the beast. And then there's some angels that say things concerning the great winepress of God's wrath. So we have God's wrath in a great winepress, and out of that comes chapters 15 and 16, which are the seven bowls, or the seven vials, as it was called in 1611 when our version was translated. So the angels have these bowls with wrath. The wrath is coming out of the winepress of God's wrath, and that's chapter 15. They're prepared, and chapter 16 we see the seven bowls, or the seven vials. And some believe that we've come far enough in the timeline of Revelation that these all seven happen in one day. They're just massive, and they're compounded by them being one on top of the other. The first vial, men receive sores. Then the sea is turned to blood. Rivers, etc., are turned to blood. There's a scorching sun. There's darkness on the earth. The Euphrates is dried up. And then there's a great voice that says, "It is done." And when that is given, there's an earthquake. The great city is divided. The islands flee, and there's a great hail. In chapters 17 and 18, Babylon is judged. Could be perhaps the aftermath of the seven vials. We see in chapter 17 religious Babylon. And then in chapter 18, political and commercial Babylon. And then the scene moves to heaven. We see the Hallelujah Chorus. This is chapter 19, celebrating the victory that will come. There's the marriage of the Lamb, and Christ on his white horse smites the nations with the sword of the Spirit. Chapter 20 tells us about the millennium. Satan is bound, and he's bound for 1,000 years, and then he's loosed and for a period of time where he gathers those, convinces people to fight against Christ, who has been ruling for 1,000 years, a time of perfect peace and everything, and yet Satan can still convince people who all they've known is peace to rebel against God, rebel against Christ, and God smites them with judgment at the end of chapter 20. Chapter 20 and 21 give us a picture of the new heaven, the new earth, the holy city, the characteristics of the New Jerusalem. We see many descriptions of the New Jerusalem. And then paradise is restored. In chapter 22, we have the river of life, the tree of life, the removal of the curse. And at the end of chapter 22, there's the promise of the sudden coming of the Lord. God is to be worshipped. There's this last promise, the last invitation. Whosoever will, let him come unto I'm going to say it wrong, but whosoever will. And then the last warning. Let me say one thing about the word sudden, and I'm over, but the back is empty. So, behold, I come quickly. That word is best understood if we understand the word quickly as suddenly. Okay, a lot of people say, oh, he said he's coming quickly, and it's been 2,000 years. That's not what the word means, that when it starts, it will happen quickly. So he can hold off his coming as long as he wants, but it's going to happen quickly. So, or suddenly is I think we understand that. Something happens quickly in a few days, or it could be a few weeks or years, and then all of a sudden, wow, it all happened so fast, right? That's to the quickly word as we read Revelation.